The Dark Side of the Asiatic Den. Prologue. Darkness. A vast sky ever so patiently molted away the present blackness in a soft and calm gush. Patches of blue spurted out in various shapes like that from an end of a brushstroke, visible patches of a dull cotton white belonging to some windy clouds levitated by and, in the act, illustrated that the third rock from the sun was indeed rotating, as the hemispherical roof, scattered with stars, complemented the fact. And then they too gradually started to lose their glitter to the diffusing dark blue bent on imbuing the grasp of dark and transitioning into day. The air circulated its cold needles around like it did usually from dusk to dawn, being kilometers of crust and earth away from the salty shores of the ocean. This period of darkness ensued condensation upon the environs that brought with it the much-needed moisture on the stunted shoots of the long narrow leaves across the sparse grasslands of the savannah, stretching for more than 1,000 square kilometers. A herd of dark water buffaloes snoozed in the late hours of night. A few of the dark bovines dozed off standing nearly 6 feet up on their strong hoofs, which held approximately 1,000 kilograms of mass. There was no doubt that they had evolved in the wild. Meanwhile, most of the mammals in the herd had chosen to rest by hunkering down on their knees to get the most out of the last hours of deep sleep. The savannah appeared motionless save for the breathing, snoring, and flipping of the tails of the dark water buffaloes gathered on a sparse piece of land. The tract was deliberately chosen to be slumbered upon in order to keep arboreal crown trees, crops, and tall shoots of grass at bay, all in order to prevent an immediate and stealthy locomotion from a predator. Nevertheless, nature has been unable to aid in conditioning the wild inhabitants of the wilderness, since the cycle keeps repeating innumerous times, no matter the precaution nor the millennia. The perpetually smooth and cold air of the night was inexplicably interrupted by an unnatural silence. A dull sand golden tuft slithered unobtrusively in between and through the grass. A black muzzle covered in a little spittle pushed softly through the tall shoots of the dry deciduous prairie. A number of paws silently pressed into the dew-moist earth as their flanks and rumps followed through, brushing against the scrawny vegetation. A cluster of yellow and green eyes twinkled across from various spots coming from within the dark density of the long shoots of the grass. The noses rose up, sniffing the scents of the last hours of the night that awaited their prerogative kill. A pride of nearly 67 lionesses spread themselves across the stunted prairie to circle around the herd of buffaloes lumbering on the sparse piece of land. Endowed with a superior and innate night vision, the lioness studied the herd, trying to single out the weakest and the most vulnerable one, destined to be strangulated between their carnivorous jaws for a very late night feast. Clutching on to patience, the pride spontaneously and stealthily crept inches closer towards the sparse land, through and under the crown of long and narrow leaves. A particular black male buffalo of an astounding size, completely ripened and rugged, had chosen to weigh its mass on his hoofs while snoozing in and out of sleep. A repetitive sound annoyed his mild indulgence in his torpid state as a twitch started to flutter on his countenance. Slowly pulling himself out of his snooze, he forced a hush upon his respiration and calm over his bearings. His cognition was apparently too quick in inferring the sounds. Grunts collectively chafed out from within the darkness of the stunted vegetation. The sounds had enveloped the dormant bovines, besieging them from the front three sides. Employing utter caution, the large male buffalo softly grunted. This followed faintly, moving his head, tail, and then kicking its front two paws into the ground. The mammal was trying to communicate with his kind. The water buffalo repeated the similar behavior, in a subtle manner to alert the enveloping members of the slumbering herd. A minute or two had passed by, and then gradually, in a very drowsy state, the body language of some of the buffaloes changed. A few members of the herd had started to snort and grunt. Some had begun to head wave amongst themselves, and a few of the heavy creatures in preparation raised their tails half up in excitement and indulged in pawing, hissing, and spitting. The grunts coming out from the darkness of the scrawny vegetation rose distinctive and started to screech of death. The pride was inching closer. Their lionesses were tightening their ring around the potential kill. The younglings in the herd opened their eyes to a blurry vision of nearly a dozen ghostly eyes peering back at them from the darkness. Awakening to the dire reality, the calves etched into a bleating cry and scantered up to their feet. The clamor of the young in return was adequately effective enough to rouse up the benumbed members of the herd that were still flaccid in deep sleep. The grunts inside the herd had quickly progressed into growls as numerous big masses of fats and muscles, covered in shiny, rugged black skins, shuffled to their feet and staggered into different directions at the burst of rancor of malign eyes emerging out of the ambush composed of scrawny weaves and blackness. The intention and objective was clear: to cleave onto throttle. The herd of buffaloes took flight, charging their nearly 1,000 kilograms of force into different directions, in between the gaps of the approaching and glowing malign apparitions, hollering their growls out even louder in a challenge. A few of the buffaloes dented their foes unforgivingly into a few approaching lionesses, who were smashed away by the impact and were rendered rolling to a stop onto the sparse ground. A few of the cats, who had successfully managed to sprint and spring up onto the flank and back of a few of the raging mammals, could not restrain their 4 pair of claws and jaws deep enough, and they too were rubbed off the rugged skin as the determined buffaloes continued to charge and sprint away from the prairie and towards and under the roof of the density of trees only meters away. The entire herd had nearly taken flight. However, a few were slackened and were in the midst of escaping the ambush. A female buffalo of an average build had been singled out by the strategy of the carnivorous pride. Knowing very well that the impeded buffalo was their best mark, the lioness slowly inched closer, encircling their quarry. A calm composure had reprised on the beast once again, so calm that they nearly sauntered with gaping eyes towards the trapped ruminant with a convincing confidence of another successful ambush. The female buffalo stood poised in the middle of the sparse ground, knowing well that she had been cornered. Her tail stood vertically erect over her hind, and her countenance wavered left to right as a sign of warning to the deliberate, slow steps of the approaching lionesses. The dull sand-tanned carnivores paused from only meters away from the herbivore and indulged in a long and frightening stare, deliberately done so to frighten and break down the spirit of the prey. And to a great extent it worked. The buffalo's body language displayed a mixture of putting up a last fight along with the contrast of defeat. It shuffled its feet and scuffled its head in every direction of the approaching predators. The animal spat and snorted between growls that were turning louder to reach bellows. Mentally exhausted, the animal transformed to a standstill from its nervous restlessness in a final bout of bravery. The dark, rugged bovine stared back at a particular lioness that had decided to halt from inching any further in her slow saunter. Lost in the gaze between the distance of her stance and the eyes of her killer, her jaws hung loose and wide open in a final long and deep bellow. She cried out for help to her fleeted away herd as a set of canines and incisors cleaved into her hump and stifle. In the midst of her defeated days, a lioness had sprung upon and mounted herself on the buffalo's hip. The cat was slipping and clinging onto the rump. A single lioness was not sufficient enough to pull the life and weight down of the rugged creature. Therefore, another lioness leaped onto the back, and 2 more joined in, one going for the shoulder and crest, and the other 2 applied their 1,000-pound biting foes into the white girth of the rugged skin. The 4 lionesses, piled up on the unrelenting buffalo, applied their sets of 30 teeth into the anatomy of the quarry, 2 sets of canines in the upper and lower jaw incised into the rugged skin, followed by the pair of incisors, 6 up and 6 down, between the 2 canines respectively, and then collectively they commenced to tear through the skin and meet the flesh impatiently. The 10 premolars and 4 molars tightened closely to help the jaws squeeze in more force to cut open the tough skin. The buffalo was still standing on her strong legs, and occasionally the forearms wavered, though the knees remained straight all the way through the cannon bone till the hoofs prodding on the ground. Observing this, 2 more lionesses decided to leap up onto the buffalo, one going for the neck and the other aiming for the stomach. 2 more sets of canines and incisors bit sharply into the flesh, searching for the veins and arteries to burst and drain the prey out and down. The one particular lioness that had paused and was staring at the buffalo still remained nonchalant on the same spot and continued to casually stare at the strangulation in the making. A massive feathery dark brown mane came into view as a male lion joined her to study the kill in front of them that had been playing out for a few minutes now. The buffalo was still on her 4 hoofs, but had finally started to stagger a little. Having had studied and watched enough, the male lion emitted a roar out of the impatience, and the lioness cleaving onto the neck bounced off the female, black ruminant in order to make way for him. The massive tawny body of the male lion leaped off the ground and onto the buffalo in a gush, throwing the buffalo off her stance as she stumbled to find her balance again from the shift in force and weight of a superior predator suddenly mounted on top of her. The bristles of the massive mane on the lion's body danced smoothly as he dug his 10-centimeter long canines deep inside the neck of the black female buffalo. This time undoubtedly it was more than 1,000 pounds of bite force, as the sharp tips immediately met the veins and arteries that were still circulating the frightened pulse of the animal. Biting deeper inside, the cartilage of tubes, veins, arteries, and tissues ruptured from the formidable alpha male power and ego of the lion. A crackling sound in the comb region indicated the breakage of bones and soft tissues in the nape of the buffalo. The strangulation was becoming effective as the quarry's bellowing was impeded by gags and difficult breathing, as it also started to falter whilst its forearms and knees started to bend and reach the ground. The 4 or 5 lionesses were still occupied bleeding the mammal from the rump, flank, back, girth, and the stomach. The male lion continued to press its face deeper as its eyes turned red, with the blood spurting up like a fountain in all directions. The life of the mammal was pounding out and fast. She could no longer hold on to the fight as her spirit drooped and her body finally lumbered sideways to the ground. The dark blue in the sky was becoming lighter, closing to daybreak. Observing that the prey was down and life was quickly beating away, before the pride could rapaciously chomp on the flesh like true savages that they were, the roar of a few engines interrupted the frenzy, and a stream of bright lights gushed into the scene, blinding the raw natural intentions around the successful kill. Hurls of sticks and stones and forceful fits of exclamations and hollers chanted blatantly out aloud from behind the streaming headlights of SUVs and gypsies. This was followed by loud and crass pounding of steel rods, bamboos, and thick wooden sticks on the ground and onto the metal frame of the vehicles. This act was lashed about continuously as the vehicles slowly inched ahead by accelerating only inches, by jarring and jolting ahead as if giving warnings, like a lion fakes his charges thrice before actually chasing the prey down. The gregarious pride of lions was successfully being subdued by the metal machines, shooting the bright lights, blinding them, and rendering them distracted from the invested kill on which life had completely evaded the body of the black female buffalo. 2 SUVs, one a dark brown Mahindra Bolero and the other a silver Mahindra Scorpio, along with a dark green semi-jeep with its rear vacant like that of a trunk of a semi-truck, closed in on the dead kill cautiously as a pride of lions slowly and reluctantly backed off with their grunting and growling, to no effect on the men manning the vehicles. The exaggeration of the battering and hollering sounds of the metal and wood on the ground flinched the lions one by one reluctantly away. Though adequate protest was expressed from their part, however, the well choreography of the vehicles and chorus of the racketing and the hostility was quite overwhelming that the pride was subdued and coerced away from their meal. The ambush kill, being cleared off by its predators, welcomed the three vehicles to halt their breaks in. However, the engines were still kept running. The doors opened of the semi-jeep and two men stepped out and one man from the brown SUV joined in to aid in lifting the kill. The men were attired in the usual ill-fitting trousers and shirts of the rural vogue. Commands in Gujarati and Kathiawari were being thrown from every direction. They were equipped with spades and ropes. A large blue-colored plastic sheet was thrown over the kill to cover it completely. And then the men got onto their tedious work to roll over the dead mammal onto the plastic sheet with their tools and applying a lot of effort. The strong and cohesive fibers of the sheet held strong as the three men lifted the heavy drag of nearly 1,000 kilograms from the two ends, while the third man lifted the kill from the middle with the help of ropes tied and levered up to a pulley on the semi-jeep, which made it a little easier to transfer and place the kill. A fourth man stepped out of the silver-colored SUV and came to their aid in lifting the dead black female buffalo onto the metal floor of the modified and void rear of the semi-jeep that was well accommodating of the huge mass. The pride of lions heaved with gaping mouths and eyes, grunting from a distance at the men who had stolen away their kill and hid it in the back of the semi-jeep. The vehicles backed off, reversing and distancing away from the pride, but the pride too actuated to a slow trot towards and behind the thieves that unjustly carried it away. Time to make money. A man sitting on the front left passenger seat of the silver SUV said in Gujarati, laughing. Turning his head and looking back at the thin man seated in the middle seat, he formed a greedy grin under his thick mustache and fat cheeks, then added, "You will get a bonus if your contacts in Rajkot and the other cities pay a good price for the lion show." The thin man seated in the middle seat of the SUV smiled. "Let's find out," he replied, back in a more refined Gujarati. Lowering his head down, he removed a black Samsung touchscreen handset from his right grey trouser pocket. The man with the thick mustache and fat cheeks smiled back with a nod, allowing the man to get started on his phone. He then shifted his eyes further back and looked through the rear window to observe the lions trotting behind the dark olive semi-jeep. Removing his walkie-talkie and switching it on, he spoke into it in Kathiawari. "Listen." A static sound buzzed on the receiver. A rough Kathiawari voice from the semi-jeep replied, "Yes, sir. Make sure you keep a good distance from the pride, but also make sure that they don't lose you." The fat-cheeked mustached man with a greedy grin commanded, "You need to keep stalling the lions and keep their interest and keep defending the kill till the rich men from Rajkot and other nearby cities and town reach here for the show. It could take up to 2 hours, you understand?" "Yes, sir." The same unrefined voice replied in Kathiawari after a static burst from the receiver. "We'll do exactly that, sir." "Good." And then the man switched off the walkie-talkie and kept it away on the dashboard right in front of his seat. The thin man in the grey trouser, white shirt and with the Samsung touchscreen handset had connected with his rich clients on the phone. "It's ready." "By when will you reach here?" The thin man nodded, speaking into the handset. Okay. Good. We will see you in 1.5 hours then. Thank you." The thin man displayed a transactional smile at the fat-cheeked mustached man. Lowering his phone down whilst his sight was still engaged on the screen, he informed, "It's done." Then lifting his gaze back up at the fat-cheeked greedy man, he added, "They will be here, and they will be bringing along 2 groups with them." "Very nice." The fat-cheeked mustached man was genuinely pleased. "Did they say how much they were going to pay?" The thin man with the refined Gujarati articulation raised his chin and leaned ahead as if to tell him the figure personally. "The rich family from Rajkot will be paying 50,000 rupees. The other 2 families will be paying about 20 to 30 because they're lesser in members. And you can make more, maybe a few 10,000s or 5,000s here or there by luring dumb tourists who are there in Sasan gear right now through your people. I love doing business with you. The fat cheek mustache man was sincere in his every word. His countenance was proof. This is after he had learned the amount of money he would be earning. The thin man raised his brows like he was helpless. What can I say? Lion shows are an easy means to accumulate wealth over a quick period of time, he declared, looking out the window. There are plenty of lions out there, and the fauna they live on. And similarly, there are plenty of rich idiots and tourists who are willing to pay despite the so-called laws. Turning his attention back onto the fat-cheeked mustache man, he confessed. And the best part is, snorting in mild humor and condescension. You can get away from the inefficient radar of the government. Ah, Modi. The fat cheek, grinning man muttered as if it was a slur. The men snorted in amusement as the three vehicles drove away at a considerable pace from the Pride to follow and keep up with the kill in sight.